Part 1. Strong hands dragged the fuller through the blistering hunk of iron, forcing its shape with a grim relentlessness that no sensible man would have called gentle. Each hammer blow cracked off the forge's basalt walls, and the weak glow of the coals sent shadows capering across splintered beams. The boy, Vulkan, knew every inch of this place. He'd been baptized in soot and cinder. If anywhere on Nocturne could pass for safety, it was here, lost in this dingy workshop. Safety was a relative term, of course, and on this cursed rock it was worth about as much as rusted nails and half-rotten wood. The old black smiter's hands were calloused into something like boiled leather, knots of scar tissue and hard-earned grime. Enbel, they called him, Vulkan's adoptive father. He worked the hammer's haft as though it were an extension of his own bones. Face drawn and weathered, the kind of face that had endured more than a few grim jokes at fate's expense. The forge's glow peeled back the ash, revealing deep creases at the corners of his eyes. Yet his dark skin seemed to simply shrug off the heat. When he quenched the spear tip with a furious hiss of steam, it conjured the distant groan of Mount Deathfire itself, that red-mawed volcano they called home. The volcano breathed and bled like a wounded god, an old tyrant coughing its toxic waste into the sky, making the people below pay for every single breath. Nocturne. What a name. Darkness and despair, the lot of it. Vulkan often wondered how any weak light survived here, smothered by smoke and lurking nightmares. Survival came from respecting the flame, and Bel had told him more times than the boy cared to remember.
Honor her. The mountain is your mother and your murderer, and you'll never know which kind of mood she's in on any given day.
These words pressed on Vulkan's mind. He sensed that he wasn't just another orphaned whelp, barely a year old yet towering over men, impossibly strong for his age. Destiny rattled around inside him, a molten lump waiting to be hammered into shape. He feared the quenching to come, whatever this world would make of him. The gods, or monsters that had left him here, had a hammer and anvil of their own, and he was caught right between. Enbel lifted the spear tip, smiling like a man too tired to pretend at pride, but trying anyway.
A new tip for your spear, son. You'll kill plenty of Sarok with it out on the plain.
Blunt talk from a blunt man, yet there was warmth and kindness there. Vulkan tried to muster some confidence, to meet his father's battered warmth halfway.
I could have done it myself, father,
he said softly. True enough, he had the skill, the strength, but he knew this was Enbel's way of giving something back, making a moment between them. Inside the forge, the heat pressed down, thick and stifling, and yet Vulkan found it comforting. This was his womb, his cradle. He could do some good here, maybe. Still unease coiled in his gut. Enbel set the hammer down with a sigh. He looked Vulkan in the eye.
There is something I need to show you.
Vulkan's heart clenched. Existential questions had passed through his mind, more recently building momentum. The how and the why of him. What made him different? What he truly was. Yet he didn't feel ready to receive the truth. Not yet. He was terrified it might unravel the foundation they carefully built, the simple love he cherished. Vulkan reached out, placing a massive hand on the old man's shoulder.
You raised me. You gave me a home. You are my father. That is enough.
There was nothing else that needed saying. Whatever truths lurked in shadows, they'd stay bound by blood and sweat and sorrow. It was all this wretched world had to offer by way of love. Before Nbel could reply, a horn's low moan slid through the silence, an ugly note of warning. Predators. The truth would have to wait. Nbel snatched his spear, the new tip still cooling. Hesiod, their home, began to stir with terror. The dreaded dusk wraiths were coming as the sky reddened. Vulkan stood by the forge's entrance and watched as panic gripped the townsfolk. People who had endured volcanic eruptions, monstrous drakes, famine, and drought, now cowered in the face of these raiders from beyond. This world had taught Vulkan many lessons, yet one overshadowed them all. Might and compassion must walk side by side. He remembered the first time he had forged a blade to protect the weak, how proud that had made him. Now he felt something else rising within. Rage at the torment visited upon his people, its scorched veins flowing through him. He imagined Mother Deathfire there with him, her spirit and his locked together in a fiery embrace. And by all the ash in this forsaken world, she would not be contained, could not be controlled. While Nbel ran to help organize the terrified townsfolk, Vulkan returned to the forge. He took 2 stout smiting hammers, one on each shoulder. The weapons felt right in his hands, as if they had always meant to serve a higher purpose than forging metal. The wind carried distant shrieks, the scent of blood and despair. Nbel and other townsfolk rallied around him, men and women clutching improvised weapons. Their eyes held a desperate resolve. Vulkan saw fear there too, and he did not blame them. He stepped into the open square, the volcanic dust swirling around his feet, and looked toward the shattered gates. The raiders would come as they always did, like wolves from a blood-red dusk. Vulkan flexed his immense arms, feeling the molten strength coiled within. A hush fell over Hesiod's gathering square. The people stood shoulder to shoulder, crude weapons and chipped courage, their only defense. They clustered behind Vulkan, who strode to the forefront like a living bulwark. The sulphurous wind that whispered through the twisted alleys brought the scent of burning resin, ash, and something rancid, something tainted by malice. Soon the nightmare would be upon them. They came as broken silhouettes against the sky, their shapes sliding over the shattered palisade. The breeze carried their ragged shrieks and twisted laughter. Fear boiled up in the hearts of Hesiod's defenders. Vulkan stood at their head, breathing heavily through his nose, his jaw grinding tirelessly, his fists clenched around the hafts of his 2 smiting hammers. He wished they were heavier, or sharper, or both. The dusk wraiths strode nonchalantly into the square, 3 of them at first. Tall, stick-thin things, their garments stitched from flayed hides and rattling bones. Their eyes caught the glow from Hesiod's torches and shone with a bestial hunger. Behind them, more crouched atop rooftops, the outline of their war skiffs hovering beyond. A man screamed from behind Vulkan's left shoulder. Bravil, a harvester whose courage had turned to piss the moment he set eyes on the wraiths. "Shut it!" hissed another villager, but fear had its way, and Bravil's shriek might as well have been blood in the water. Vulkan stepped forward.
"Return!"
he bellowed.
"Return to your ships and begone! You will only find death waiting for you here."
One of the witches let loose a hellish cackle. It was a sound like nothing else. Imagine your worst enemy retching directly into your ear canal, while Nocturne's least accomplished bard attempts to murder a harp on your other eardrum. The humans winced, from fear or disgust. The witch hissed a few words to one of her kin, and the lesser male snapped to attention like a dog yanked by its chain. His eyes were black, bottomless pits, glinting with the malice of something that thrived on pain. They locked on Vulkan. With a shrilling cry, he raced at the Nocturnian, who had dared to defy the slavers. He was fast, like a lightning adder. A woman, young, determined, foolish, thrust her spear at the creature's heart. The wraith's movement was contemptuous, almost lazy, as it batted aside her futile attack. With a whisper of metal, the blade opened her throat, painting the packed earth in crimson droplets that sizzled and gleamed in the torchlight. She gurgled, clutching at the gaping wound, knees buckling. The wraith didn't spare her another glance as it flowed past her falling body, its eyes never wavering from Vulkan's face. Vulkan roared and stepped into its path, hammer raised high. The wraith danced to the side, fast, impossibly fast, leaning back so that the hammerhead missed its skull by a finger's breadth. It hissed, amused, and lashed out again. This time Vulkan caught one edge on his forearm. Pain flared hot and bright. He snarled, swung again. The wraith tried to slip out of reach, but Vulkan's follow-up blow took it low, smashed it right in the hip with a sickening crunch of snapping bone. The creature shrieked, stumbling to its knees. Without hesitation, Vulkan grabbed a fistful of its greasy hair and slammed its face into the hard earth once, twice, until skull fragments grated beneath his fingers. He lifted its ruined head, stared into an eye reduced to pink jelly, and flung the corpse aside like a piece of spoiled meat. He spat and glared at the female witch.
Not wraiths at all, just flesh and blood.
The witch smiled, her interest and her ardor suddenly piqued. She licked her lips, then blended back into the shadows. Before Vulkan could come after her, the gate to the town of Hesiod exploded in a storm of splinters and fire. Vulkan was engulfed, reduced to a dark and hazy silhouette as the fire rolled over him. Shielding his eyes, he knew he would not perish and stepped from the conflagration unharmed. All around them, the night howled. More wraiths spilled into the square, 5, 6, more still, bringing with them a skiff that hovered beyond the ruined gate. This one carried slavers armed with rifles that spat glittering shards. One villager's chest exploded in a spray of crimson chunks as a volley tore through him, showering his neighbors in hot gore. Another man lost half his face, a red, dripping ruin of teeth and shattered bone, before he hit the ground thrashing like a snared animal. The villagers wailed, stumbling over each other, desperate to escape the nets of razor chain that hissed through the air and caught on flesh, tearing off faces, scalping heads, plucking eyes like ripe fruit. One of the wraiths landed in front of Vulkan, hunched low like a starving wolf. Sparks flew as Vulkan caught its blade on his hammer's haft. Another blade came slashing in, nicking Vulkan's bicep, drawing a line of dark blood. Vulkan gritted his teeth, spat out a curse, and drove forward, hammering again and again in a savage rhythm. He caught the wraith's wrist, twisted until he felt bones pop, then smashed his forehead into its hooked mask. The mask cracked, revealing a gaunt, pallid face twisted in pain. Before it could shriek, he rammed his hammer into its open mouth and felt the skull give way with a wet crunch. Rotten, stinking brains slopped onto the dirt at his feet. His muscles ached, but Vulkan barely felt it. His world narrowed to the next swing, the next kill. Another wraith slithered close, tried to flank him, and Bell shouted a warning. Vulkan spun, caught the bastard by the throat, and slammed it into a broken fence post. The wooden spike jutted through the creature's belly with a horrific slurp. It flailed, scratching at Vulkan's hands, hissing curses. He wrenched its arm straight and snapped it in two as easily as breaking a twig. It screeched, vomited black bile. Vulkan left it there to die slowly, pinned like a grotesque insect. Vulkan vaulted high, a shadow against the screaming chaos below. Warriors surged beneath him, their blades slicing nothing but empty air. He landed in front of the skiff with a thud that cracked the earth, boots kicking up a spray of bloody dirt. His fingers clamped down on the lamella nose of the machine, digging deep like iron spikes driven into rotten wood. With a growl, the Nocturnian heaved. The skiff groaned, steel screaming as it tipped. Slavers tumbled from its deck, screeching like rats pitched from a sinking ship, their clawing hands grasping for anything to save them. Vulkan gave it one last shove, and the damned thing flipped onto its side, tumbling like a discarded spear shaft. Two more followed in its wake, kicking up clouds of dust and ash. The first carried a pack of warriors, packed shoulder to shoulder, blades at the ready. At a barked command from the driver, the skiff surged forward, engines screaming, the spiked prow aimed squarely at Vulkan's chest. With perfect timing, Vulkan leapt. His boots slammed down hard on the barge's spiked nose, and he sprinted up the plated hull. The warriors came at him, spitting hell shards from their rifles or lunging with jagged blades. Vulkan smashed their attacks aside and was amongst them, hewing with his hammers. Hatred fueled his every swing, together with a determination that the cycle of torture and fear would end here at this very dawn. He tore loose the command throne of the skiff's driver, the warriors a broken mess behind him, and threw it at the third vehicle. An energy bloom erupted, blinding as a sunburst, when the crude missile collided with the shimmering field around the last skiff. The shield flared, crackling with power, but Vulkan didn't stop. He charged straight through it, heedless of the burning agony that seared his skin as the barrier gave way under his sheer momentum. He landed hard on the deck, boots ringing against the iron plates. Before him stood a cadre of warriors, larger and harder than the rest. These weren't common rabble. Their bladed glaives hummed with unnatural power, and their alabaster faceplates gleamed coldly against the blood-red ornate armor, like ghosts carved from the marrow of some ancient nightmare. Behind them, the slaver lord loomed, his horned helm casting jagged shadows across his throne-like perch. Through the wicked slits of his visor, Vulkan could feel the malice radiating like heat. A single rasped order slipped through the grill of his fanged mouthpiece, and his warriors moved as one. The first ghost closed the distance in a heartbeat, glaive singing through the air in a murderous arc. Vulkan dipped low, the blade missing by inches and leaving a fiery trail in its wake. Another came at him. Vulkan caught the haft and drove it down into the deck with a shuddering clang. But the impact left his hand slick with blood and smoke curling from his flesh. A third blow came faster, harder. His hammer caught it mid-swing, only to erupt into a shower of cinders. Vulkan snarled, stepping back, empty-handed but far from helpless. The slaver lord rose from his seat, his displeasure evident in every syllable spat through his helm. Vulkan's continued defiance was an insult that demanded blood. With their enemy stripped of weapons, the ghost's arrogance swelled to new, impressive heights. They circled him with slow, measured steps, savoring the kill to come. Vulkan bared his teeth into something resembling a smile.
I need no weapon to kill the likes of you.
Vulkan moved like a thunderbolt, too fast for eyes dulled by overconfidence. He wrenched a glaive from one ghost's hands, turned it, and drove it through the warrior's chest with bone-splintering force. Another came at him, but Vulkan ducked the blow, twisted the weapon free, and used it to take the head clean off his second foe. Blood sprayed in great arcs, painting the deck with gruesome artistry. Piece by piece, the bodyguards fell, impaled on their own blades, dismembered by the brute strength of a man who didn't need steel to make death. When it was done, Vulkan hurled the broken remains over the skiff's edge, their shattered bodies raining down into the chaos below. The deck was clear, but the slaver lord, who still sat upon his throne. Vulkan raised a finger.
This terror ends with your life.
Vulkan!
Enbel's voice rang out. Instinct told Vulkan to reach out with his open hand. A subtle change in the breeze suggested something moving through it. His senses alive to everything, Vulkan's fingers closed around the worn haft of a smiting hammer and plucked it blindly from the air. It left his grip a split second later, spinning towards the slaver lord, then splitting his ugly mask. His face cloven in two, the body dropped his sword and toppled off the end of the skiff. Vulkan vaulted from the skiff to the square below, landing amid the wraiths with a thundering crash. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate. He was of the killing mind now, his warrior's spirit blazing like a forge fire. The first wraith he caught mid-stride, one massive hand seizing the creature's helm. A moment later, its skull was pulp, leaking through the cracks of the steel. The next, he snatched by the arm and drove down hard against his knee, snapping its spine. A third came, then a fourth, then a fifth, each dispatched with bare fists, bone and sinew breaking beneath his unrelenting fury. For every blow he struck, for every life he extinguished, the blood price of Nocturne's torment was repaid in kind. Centuries of suffering balanced in moments of brutal retribution. The battle didn't last long. The wraiths, unprepared for such wrath, faltered and broke. The remnants fled, scattering into the shadows. Only the witches lingered, their laughter ringing high above the carnage. One remained apart, dancing through the melee with terrible grace, her knives spinning in a blur. Each pirouette left another Nocturnian falling in pieces, their bodies spilling onto the blood-soaked square. Vulkan's eyes narrowed to slits of pure hate as they locked on her. But the hate turned to dread when he saw who stumbled next into her path.
Father!
Vulkan surged forward, cursing himself for his earlier recklessness, for losing the hammer that had ended the slaver lord. Every step toward the witch felt like wading through a lake of tar. She moved with a predator's focus, her knives flashing, her murderous dance cutting closer to Enbel with every second. Tears blurred Vulkan's vision, turning the blood and chaos to a crimson haze. He could see it all unfolding. Every awful detail burned into his memory. Enbel raising his spear, hopelessly outmatched, the witch's knives glinting like fangs as they sought his heart. Her eyes dagger-thin and cruel, brimming with arrogance even as she worked her slaughter, met Vulkan's across the battlefield, and she smiled. The blades came, swift and final, but Bruar, the burly metal shaper, threw himself into the fray with a roar that shook the square. His axe caught one knife, deflecting it with a shriek of steel. The second blade found its mark, sinking deep into his belly. Brohar froze, a grim look of surprise on his face as his insides spilled in steaming coils to the ground. For a moment, he stood there, staring down at his death. Then he crumpled, and the blood pooling from his corpse lapped at Enbel's feet. The witch stepped forward, her amusement unbroken. But Bruha's sacrifice had bought what mattered most: time. Time for Vulkan to cross the square, his fury towering, his voice like thunder.
Face me!
The witch recoiled, serpentine and wary, as Vulkan closed the distance. His fists swung in great arcs, each blow meant to shatter and destroy. She ducked, wove, twisted, but for all her speed and grace, she could not counter, could not strike back. She danced away from him, retreating step by step, until the square's edge gave her room to escape. With a final mocking grin, she turned and fled. Vulkan roared his rage as she disappeared beyond the crumbled walls of Hesiod. Outside, a tear split the fabric of reality itself. Darkness yawned beyond, filled with the wailing screams of the damned. The witch stepped into it without hesitation, her knives glinting one last time before the void swallowed her whole. Vulkan stood among piles of ruined corpses, chest heaving. He tried to catch his breath, to find some sense in the horror. And Bel came to him, mouth set in a grim line. A tiny cough drew Vulkan's attention downward. A child, staring at him with wide, tear-soaked eyes, clutching a rag doll with half its stuffing torn out. Vulkan lowered himself to one knee, arms shaking with fatigue, and gently touched the child's shoulder, leaving a crimson fingerprint on her tattered sleeve. He opened his mouth, tried to say something comforting, but the words stuck. They moved among the dead. It was a grim inventory. Neighbors, friends, elders who once smiled over shared meals and tales by the forge fire. Children sprawled in oversized boots they'd meant to grow into, their futures scattered like the night's darkness. Vulkan pried a broken spear from a headless torso, its fingers still locked in that final, desperate defense. A few paces away lay the butcher's son, whose skull had been split down the middle, brains drying to a pinkish crust in the weak sunlight. Vulkan worked without complaint, without flinching. He was a mountain, absorbing the horror of his kin so they might endure. When they had heaped the bodies near the old well at the center of town, too many to bury all at once, a silence stretched over them again. Scavengers would come soon, drawn by the stink. On Nocturne they never waited long, and these corpses were a feast.
Brogar is dead.
An unnecessary fact. Vulkan had seen the man die.
But you live, Father, and for that I will be eternally grateful.
His voice still trembled with an undercurrent of the rage that had consumed him during the fight. His chest heaved like a bellows, drenched in alien blood.
We live, son.
He put his hand on Vulkan's arm, and something about the feel of those old and calloused fingers calmed the Nocturnian, siphoning the tension away.
Such hate. I felt it, Father. It touched me as sure as I can feel your hand upon me now.
He turned to face the old man, his eyes ablaze like balefires.
I am a monster.
And Bel didn't recoil, but held Vulkan's cheek.
You are a true Promethean son.
But the fury.
He looked down.
The way I killed them with my bare hands.
Before meeting his father's gaze again, he said,
I am not a black smiter, am I?
The people of the town were gathering. Despite all the death that muddied their streets, the mood was exultant. Vulkan was being hailed as a hero. And Bel sighed.
You are not. You are from up there.
Vulkan followed his father's outstretched hand to the hot sky above. The sun burned down like a single glowering eye, wreathed in smoky cloud. Vulkan closed his eyes and allowed the heat to warm him, and Bel's voice distant in his mind.
You came from the stars. Back at the forge, That is what I wanted to show you.
Vulkan nodded. There had been a trap door, an old secret buried in soot and shadow. They trudged through the ruined streets, stepping over broken planks and spattering pools of drying blood. The forge stood at the edge of town, miraculously still upright. The doorway bore fresh scars from the fight. Splintered wood, a streak of black ichor where a wraith's head had shattered. Vulkan stepped inside, ducking through the threshold. It was dark, quiet, save for the faint crackle of dying embers. Tools hung on the walls, coated in a thin layer of fresh ash. And Bell led him to the back of the stone forge, where the old anvil had been shoved aside. There, a dull square of stone was set into the floor, and Bell knelt and wiped soot from the edges, his joints popping. He looked older than ever, face drawn, eyes distant.
For so long, I kept this secret, praying I'd never have to show you. I feared what would happen if I did. Not just for you, but for me, for what I'd lose. But after last night, after what you've done, I can't hide it anymore.
And Bell's hands trembled on the heavy slab.
Help me, son.
With one hand, Vulkan lifted the slab free and set it aside, revealing darkness below. The scent that rose from within was stale, layered with old stone and earth. A narrow staircase descended into gloom, and Bell fumbled for a lantern, lit it with a shaky spark. The glow was weak, flickering over their faces, carving hollow shadows in the old man's cheeks and making Vulkan's eyes gleam like smoldering coals. Together they descended, step by careful step, away from the charred daylight and into the depths beneath the forge. The steps ended at a small chamber, cramped and low-ceilinged, its walls carved from rough stone. Dust motes danced in the lantern light. At the far end stood something draped in a heavy cloth, and beside it a chest sealed with old iron bands. And Bell crossed to the chest, breathing hard, knelt and pressed his palm to its lid as if greeting an old friend long lost.
This is where I kept it, where I hid any clue about what you truly are, son.
Bell lifted the chest's lid. Inside lay scraps of metal, twisted and half-melted, and something like a charred amulet. There was a faint shimmer to these fragments, unlike anything Vulkan had seen on Nocturne. He reached out, hesitant, fingertips brushing metal still warm to the touch, though no fire had touched it in decades.
I found you in the ash. You were just a baby, barely able to walk, yet you were the most spectacular thing I ever saw.
He trailed off.
You were huge, though, already taller than most children,
he said with a faint smile.
You fell from the sky. I thought you a gift. The forge fire led me to you that night, and I chose to raise you as my own.
The lantern flame wavered, painting the old man's tears in liquid gold. Vulkan's eyes drifted to the fragments in the chest, to the draped object behind them. He knew there was more to see, more to understand. Above them, muffled, he heard someone calling his name, or maybe just crying out in pain. He had come here expecting answers, and he'd received some. Crude, jagged truths that would gnaw at him. But for the moment, he set them aside. Hesiod's people awaited his help. The wounded moaned, and the dead needed a funeral pyre. The stranger arrived on a day when the ash clouds hung low and heavy over Hesiod, turning noon to dusk. In the month since the Dusk Wraith attack, Vulkan's legend had grown. Tribal kings from the 7 settlements had come to pay homage, to see the giant who had turned the hunters into prey. Some brought offerings, rare metals, drake scales, gems pried from the volcanic depths. Others brought their daughters, speaking of alliances and bloodlines. Vulkan accepted the first with grace and declined the second with even more. He was in the forge when the stranger appeared, working a piece of drake iron that glowed like captured sunlight. The metal was stubborn, resistant to his hammer in a way few things were. Each strike sent sparks cascading through the gloom like falling stars. "Your technique is flawed." The voice cut through the rhythm of his work. Vulkan turned to find a figure standing in the doorway, backlit by the ruddy daylight. He was pale, paler than any Nocturnian Vulkan had ever seen.
"The forge is closed,"
Vulkan said, dismissing the man. The stranger stepped inside, and the forge light played across his features. "The metal remembers," he said, gesturing to the drake iron. "Each strike carries the echo of the ones before. Your hammer falls with anger, and so the metal resists." Vulkan's grip tightened on his hammer.
"You speak like a metal shaper."
"I speak like one who has forged many things." Before Vulkan could respond, Enbel entered the forge. The old black smiter stopped short at the sight of the stranger, his face draining of color.
"My lord,"
he began, then caught himself.
Stranger, what brings you to our humble forge?"
The pale man smiled. "I've come for the tournament."
"Tournament?"
"Have you not heard?" The stranger's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Word has spread of the giant who drove back the dusk wraiths. The tribal kings have called for a contest of strength and skill to see if the tales are true." He paused, and something ancient stirred behind his eyes. "So I have come to compete." A laugh burst from Vulkan before he could stop it.
"You?"
The stranger's smile remained fixed. "Unless you fear the challenge." Enbel stepped between them, his movements careful.
"The tournament is open to all, but you should know that my son has never been defeated."
"There is always a first time." The stranger turned to leave, then stopped. "The metal remembers," he said again. With that, he was gone. Vulkan turned to his father.
"What was that about?"
Enbel was staring at the doorway, his face troubled.
"The tribal kings arrived this morning. They say it's time to formalize your position as champion of Nocturne."
He hesitated.
"But that man..."
"What about him?"
"I'm not sure. There's something familiar, like I have seen him before."
Enbel shook his head.
"Be careful, my son. He might not be what he appears."
Vulkan's grip was faltering. Even his strength, prodigious as it was, wouldn't hold the cliff's edge in one hand and the drake hide in the other much longer. The beast had been a glory of vermilion, scales thick as shield wall iron, its belly ridged with taut muscle, its jaws wide enough to take a man whole. The mountain had called it, and it had risen, a terrible answer from the deepest black. The spear Vulkan had forged to kill it was gone, lost to the chasm, swallowed by the mountain's blood. Hours of work undone in a single heartbeat. His life would be next if he slipped. The sun scalded his bare back, though its heat was dwindling. The real heat was below, where steam and smoke boiled up in plumes, ash stinging his eyes, sulfur burning his nose. Hours had passed since the eruption had tossed him over the edge, saved only by the reflexes that had kept him alive this long. Reflexes that wouldn't save him forever. Even a champion could fall. The tribal kings had sung his name after the slavers' defeat, their emissaries clamoring to see this blacksmith's son who was fast becoming legend. Yet, as he dangled over a sea of molten rock, Vulkan considered it a piss-poor way to die. He slipped. For a moment the world tilted. He reached, found purchase. A lower crag bit into his fingers, sent grit raining into the fire below. His chest heaved, though he tried not to breathe too deeply. The air was a poison now, thick and burning. His throat blistered with every gasp. An ordinary man would have died by now. The hide! Vulkan's fingers trembled on it. If he let go, he could climb. Probably. The molten river below crackled and spat, a sound like laughter, mocking his hesitation. 8 days. 8 days of trials, of pushing himself past every breaking point he thought he had. He was heavy now, heavier than his own limbs, barely able to tell where he ended, and the weightlessness began.
You will not beat me.
The words broke from his lips, defiant. The lava didn't care, its laughter louder now. The Outlander had matched him trial for trial. Pale-skinned and strange, his boasts had been met with open scorn when he arrived, claiming he'd best anyone in the Mountains tournament. And Vulkan, to his shame, had let him try. Let the fool lose his life to the trials, he'd said. Let the anvil decide. Now the anvil was here, and Vulkan was the one bending under its weight. The hiss of molten rock brought him back to the present. He looked down. The hide's long tail drifted on the updrafts, taunting him, daring him to fall. Then a cry split the air. "Vulkan!" Through the smoke, the figure appeared. The Outlander bounding over the jagged terrain with impossible ease. On his back was a hide larger than any Vulkan had ever seen, eclipsing the pelt Vulkan clung to like a mountain over a hill. Vulkan blinked against the sting in his eyes, unsure if it was real or some fevered illusion. The Outlander moved fast, casting the immense hide into the lava between them, its massive span bridging the molten trench. He leapt, landing cleanly on the other side. Without hesitation, he reached the edge and thrust a hand toward Vulkan's wrist. The stranger hauled him up in a single titanic motion, Drake, hide and all. They collapsed onto the stone, sucking in the stifling air, the heat pressing down like a smith's hammer. Vulkan didn't move, the ground rough against his back, the ache in his limbs dull and distant now. Eventually, the stranger rose, extending a hand. Vulkan took it. In the distance, the Outlander's prize was gone, sinking into the molten depths like a whispered secret. Vulkan clapped his shoulder. His strength was returning in pieces.
You saved my life.
If you hadn't held on as long as you did, there'd have been nothing left to save. The drake hide in Vulkan's hand felt heavier somehow. He glanced to the lava where its molten laughter still bubbled.
You could have claimed victory.
At the cost of your life. What kind of victory is that? Ash fell thick now, flakes swirling in a darkening sky. The air stank of brimstone, and the mountain grumbled, restless as a drunk on the verge of violence.
The mountain's not finished. We need to move.
The Outlander nodded. Together they began the descent, the air thick with heat and ash, the stone beneath their feet sharp and uncertain. By the time they returned to Hesiod, the town was roaring. A throng of faces pressed in, shouting his name, their cries blending into a single deafening cacophony. Chiefs and emissaries pushed forward, their hands grasping, their mouths full of praise. And Bel was there, his arms wrapping Vulkan in an iron grip that felt like home.
You did it,
the Black Smiter said, his voice low but fierce.
I knew you would.
He turned, gesturing to the wild crowd.
Nocturne hails you, boy.
Vulkan's name boomed, echoing through the streets, their adulation battering him like waves. He stood amidst it all, a statue carved from flesh and fire. The Outlander lingered at the edge of the crowd, quiet, his expression unreadable. He didn't join the revelry, just watched. Ban-Ek, king of Themis, stepped forward, his gaze falling to the drake hide draped over Vulkan's shoulder. "A trophy worthy of a king," he said, bowing low. "You'll cut a fine figure with it as your mantle." Vulkan blinked, realizing he'd forgotten it was there. The weight of it pressed differently now.
"No."
Ban-Ek frowned, the word hanging in the air like an unfinished blade. "What?"
"It's not mine to keep."
Vulkan shrugged the hide from his shoulder, his hands gripping the coarse scales as he stepped toward the Outlander. Enbel reached for him, panic flashing in his eyes.
Vulkan, don't!
He waved him off, stepping closer.
"To sacrifice pride for a life, that's what matters. This is yours."
The Outlander's gaze didn't falter, his hands lifting to take the hide. Approval burned in his eyes, deeper than the molten pits of the mountain. "Vulkan, you are everything I hoped you would become." Vulkan froze, confusion knotting his brow.
"Who are you?"
The words left his mouth before he could stop them.
"What are you?"
"Questions," the Outlander said, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Answers will come, but not all at once." They sat at the edge of the Pyre Desert as the sun bled over the sands. Vulkan's thoughts churned, the dry wind carrying the weight of ash and the promise of fire. This world was home, harsh and unrelenting, and yet he felt it slipping from him, a tether fraying with each breath.
"I have brothers?"
The Outlander nodded. "Many. Some wait for you already." A strange warmth settled in Vulkan's chest at that. He had always been alone, even among his people. The thought of family somewhere out in the stars filled a space he hadn't realized was empty.
"What happens to my father? To Hesiod?"
"They'll be safe. You've made them strong. That strength will endure."
"How, if I'm not here to protect them?"
The Outlander smiled, a faint, sad thing that carried the weight of years. "You've already done more than you know." There was no comfort in those words, not really, just truth, raw and unyielding.
"You're asking me to leave?"
Vulkan turned his face to the sun, its heat unrelenting. "I am. Your destiny lies elsewhere."
"What destiny? What am I supposed to become?"
"You'll see." The Outlander's voice softened, a rare note of something almost fragile. "When the time comes, you'll know." Light began to bleed from him then, golden and radiant, the air around him shimmering with it. Vulkan squinted against it, his heart thundering in his chest as the stranger cast aside his disguise. As night fell over Nocturne, Mount Deathfire erupted once more, sending a column of flame into the sky, a farewell torch perhaps, or a reminder that even as Vulkan prepared to leave his home behind, its fires would always burn within him. In the forge below, the trap door lay forgotten. Its secrets no longer mattered. The truth had found him anyway, through fire and sacrifice. The Emperor's ship hung above Nocturne like a golden sword. From the highest point in Hesiod, Vulkan watched its massive form eclipse the stars, its presence both beautiful and terrible. Surface details were lost in the eternal smoke that wreathed his world, making the vessel seem more like a myth made manifest than a work of technology. Perhaps that was fitting. He had spent his last day in the forge with Enbel, working the metal one final time. They barely spoke. What words could encompass this moment? Instead, they let the rhythm of hammer falls say what their voices could not. Together they forged a blade, pouring everything they had learned from each other into its creation. When it was done, Nbel presented it to him with trembling hands.
To remember us by,
the old black smiter said, his voice rough with unshed tears. The entire population of Hesiod had gathered to bid him farewell. They stood in the square below, their faces turned upward like flowers following the sun. Among them he saw Serah, Brohar's widow, holding her children close. The tribal kings were there too, their traditional rivalries forgotten in this moment of transformation.
They will need leadership,
Vulkan said to Nbel, who stood beside him.
The Dusk Wraiths will return.
We survived before you came to us,
Nbel replied, though his voice lacked conviction.
We will survive after.
I've taught them to fight back, to stand together.
Vulkan's hands clenched into fists.
But it should be me standing with them.
Your father, your true father, spoke to me of what awaits you. You were meant for more than just protecting one world, my son. The galaxy needs you.
The galaxy?
Vulkan echoed, tasting the word strangeness. Until a few days ago, his whole universe had been contained beneath Nocturne's smoke-wreathed skies. A light appeared in the heavens, not the ship itself, but something smaller, descending through the eternal haze. The Emperor's shuttle, coming to claim him. Vulkan turned to Nbel one last time.
You could come with me.
The old man shook his head, smiling through his tears.
My place is here, tending the forge. Someone need to teach the others what you taught me about standing against the dark.
He reached up to touch Vulkan's face.
But you will always be my son. The stars cannot change that.
The shuttle was closer now. Its golden surface caught the ruddy light of the setting sun, transforming it into something that seemed forged from living flame. Around its edges, Vulkan could make out symbols of power and authority that spoke of an empire vaster than anything Nocturne had ever known. A tremor ran through the ground, Mount Deathfire bidding farewell to her greatest son. The volcano's rumble was answered by horns from every watchtower in Hesiod, their deep notes carrying across the ashen plains. One by one, signal fires blazed to life on distant peaks as the word spread. The giant was leaving, ascending to walk among the stars themselves.
They say the Emperor can reshape worlds, that he can forge destinies as easily as we forge metal.
Then I will learn from him as I learned from you.
Vulkan gripped his father's shoulder.
But I will never forget who first taught me the meaning of strength.
The shuttle touched down in the square, its landing struts sinking into the volcanic soil. Steam rose where its heat met the ground, wreathing it in a cloak of white that made it seem even more otherworldly. A ramp descended and light spilled out like molten gold. Vulkan took a deep breath, filling his lungs one last time with the familiar scent of ash and iron that had been his world for so long. Then he began to descend from the high point, each step carrying him closer to his destiny. The crowd parted before him, creating a path to the shuttle. Many reached out to touch him as he passed, as if trying to take some small part of his strength with them. He saw tears on faces that had weathered countless hardships without breaking. Their giant was leaving them, stepping into legend. At the foot of the ramp, he turned back one final time. Nbel had followed him down and stood at the front of the crowd, his face wet with tears, but his bearing proud.
Remember us,
the old black smiter called. Vulkan's voice carried across the square.
How could I? I was made in Nocturne's fire. I expect the forge to be burning when I get back,
he said with a grin. Then he turned and ascended the ramp. each step echoing like hammer falls in the sudden silence. The light engulfed him, transformed him, until to those watching from below he seemed more icon than man, a figure of legend already, though his legend was only beginning. The ramp closed behind him, and the shuttle's engines flared to life. As it rose into the smoke-filled sky, Mount Deathfire erupted one final time, sending a column of flame high into the heavens, a torch to light his way to the stars, and a reminder of the fire that would always burn in his heart. In the forge below, the hammer lay silent on the anvil, waiting for the next hand strong enough to lift it. I pressed my hands against the viewport's cold surface, my breath fogging the glass as I tried to take in the impossible sight before me. Terra. The birth world of humanity stretched beneath us, and it stole the very air from my lungs. Terra's skies were clear as crystal, showing colors I had never known existed, blues deeper than any gem I'd ever mined, whites purer than the hottest forge fire, and greens. By the mountain's heart, the greens! I had never seen so much life in one place. The Imperial Palace rose from this sea of colors like something from a fever dream. In Hesiod, we built our homes into the mountain's bones, humble shelters against the fury of our world. But this was a mountain made by human hands. Its golden spires caught the sunlight and threw it back 1,000-fold, each tower large enough to house every soul in Hesiod thrice over. I found myself counting the levels, trying to understand the scale of it, but my mind kept slipping away from the numbers.
Overwhelming, isn't it?
I turned to find Horus watching me. As first found of our father's sons, he carried himself with a natural grace that made even his ornate armor seem casual.
I never imagined.
I struggled to find the words.
A nocturne, we measure greatness by what we can protect, what we can preserve against the mountain's wrath. But this...
I gestured at the sprawling expanse below.
This is preservation beyond anything I dreamed possible.
A ghost of a smile crossed his severe features.
Each of us had that moment. Even Russ, though he'd never admit it now. The others are gathering in the Forge Temple.
Horus told me after a moment.
They're eager to meet you.
At the mention of a forge, my heart lifted. Perhaps here was something I could understand, a familiar anchor in this sea of marvels. I followed Horus through corridors that dwarfed any cave system on Nocturne, each hall adorned with artwork that told stories I yearned to learn. The Forge Temple's doors opened, and the familiar scent of hot iron and coal embraced me like Nbel's welcome after a long hunt. But even here, wonder waited. The forges were unlike anything I'd ever seen, their flames burning with colors I didn't have names for, working metals I'd never dreamed of. And there, gathered around a central anvil, were my brothers. Ferrus Manus' silver hands gleamed in the forge light. Beside him, Fulgrim moved with liquid grace, while Leman Russ lounged against a pillar.
The newest brother arrives,
Fulgrim said, his voice musical and welcoming.
The Emperor speaks highly of your skill at the forge.
As does he of yours,
I replied, noting the masterwork blade at Fulgrim's hip.
all of yours.
Ferrus Manus approached, his metal hands drawing my attention.
"Show me your weapon, brother,"
he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. I drew Nbel's sword, suddenly aware of its simple craftsmanship. But there was no shame in my voice as I presented it.
Forged by the man who raised me. It's not the finest blade here, but it carries the lessons of its making in every inch of steel.
Ferrus took the blade, testing its balance.
"Honest work,
he said after a moment.
Pure. Sometimes the simplest forms speak the loudest truths.
You sound like a craftsman.
A smile crossed his features.
We shall have to work the forges together, brother. There is much we could learn from each other.
The Great Crusade awaits.
Horus said, moving to stand beside me.
There are wonders out there that would humble even Terra's splendor. And horrors too.
Leman Russ pushed himself off the pillar.
Aye, and that's why we need more brothers with fire in their bones. The galaxy's a cold place, Vulkan. Could use some warming up.
I laid Enbel's sword upon the anvil, watching how the forge light played across its simple steel.
On Nocturne, we learn early that fire can protect as well as destroy. It's not just about the flame itself, but how you tend it.
There speaks the wisdom of a craftsman,
Fulgrim said, running a finger along the sword's edge.
Though I wonder, have you ever worked with materials beyond your world's iron? There are metals that sing when you forge them, alloys that remember their shapes, steel that drinks light itself.
I would learn,
I admitted, my voice thick with genuine wonder.
Everything here is so
I gestured at the vast forges around us.
so far beyond what I knew possible.
Ferrus Manus's metal hands clinked against the anvil as he leaned forward.
Then let us teach you, brother. But first show us how they forge on Nocturne. Show us what your father taught you.
I found myself moving to one of the forges, my hands already reaching for the tools with instinctive familiarity, despite their strange designs. The heat embraced me like an old friend as I began to work, telling the story of Nocturne through steel and flame.
We forge to survive.
I explained as I worked, the metal taking shape beneath my hammer.
Every blade must serve multiple purposes. Every tool must last. We don't have the luxury of pure artistry.
Yet, there is artistry in necessity.
Fulgrim observed, watching intently.
See how the metal flows? There is poetry hidden there.
Horus stayed silent, but I could feel him studying not just my work, but my words, my bearing, everything that made me who I was. The Emperor's first found son was already showing the qualities of a leader, gathering understanding of each brother to forge us into something greater.
The metal remembers,
I said, quenching the small blade I'd crafted.
Every hammer blow, every fold, every lesson learned the hard way. On Nocturne, we say that a weapon carries the soul of its maker.
As do we all carry something of our forging, came a new voice, vast and deep as creation itself. The Emperor's presence filled the forge temple like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. We knelt, even Horus, though I noticed how our father's hand brushed his firstborn's shoulder with particular affection as he passed. He lifted the blade I'd just forged, studying it in the light. The strength of Nocturne, he said, forged in Terra's fires. This is what the Great Crusade must be, not the elimination of difference, but the union of strengths. Mars swelled in the viewport, red as an old wound scabbed over, its surface clawed by the weight of endless industry. Terra had been alive, riotous with greens and blues. Mars was dead, a corpse hollowed out and rebuilt, its scars the work of machines that knew no rest. My father's words gnawed at me, fragments of our last exchange still sharp in my mind. Mars will teach you, he had said, the meaning wrapped in the same riddles he favored. The best lessons hide in the dark. The forge world loomed closer, its sprawl of forge temples and manufactorums spilling across the planet. From orbit I could see canyons carved by mining rigs, oceans of rust, the faint glint of lights in the shadowed places where ancient machines groaned and flickered.
Lord Vulkan.
Kane's voice dragged me back. The tech priest stood rigid, his augmetics whirring softly, the smell of incense clinging to him like smoke.
We approach Olympus Mons. The Fabricator General extends his welcome.
I nodded, studying the mountain that wasn't truly a mountain. Olympus Mons rose like a steel god's throne, its summit lost in storms it summoned itself.
I look forward to learning,
I said, meaning it. Mars held knowledge, the kind you couldn't find in libraries. Cain inclined his head, a gesture too precise to be human.
The Omnissiah blesses your arrival.
The ship banked, beginning its final approach. I could now make out more details of the Forge Temple's architecture. Impossibly tall spires were linked by bridges that seemed spun from light. Great lifts carried materials between levels, looking from this distance like blood flowing through metallic veins. And everywhere there was movement, ships, cargo haulers, streams of workers flowing like rivers between facilities. But it was the contrasts that caught my eye. Behind the gleaming spires, I could see the darker spaces, the zones where ancient ruins lay half buried in red sand. Even the worker movements showed clear stratification. Some paths blazed with light and protection, while others were swallowed in shadow.
Your world is different,
I said carefully.
It may look barren, even dead, yet in this soil rests the future of us all,
Cain replied.
Here we build the tools humanity needs to reclaim the stars.
I thought of Nocturne's simple forges, of Enbel teaching me that every hammer blow must have purpose.
And what of those who do the building?
Cain was silent for a moment.
The Omnissiah's work requires many hands, each assigned to its proper task.
He gestured to an approaching dock.
Come, the Fabricator General's representatives await.
The first week on Mars chewed me up and spat me out, my enhanced mind stretched thin under the weight of knowledge I hadn't even guessed existed. The Magos metallurgists had me start with the mysteries of the Forge reactors, vast plasma hearts that powered their greatest works. Where Nocturne's forges relied on geothermal heat and coal fire, here they harnessed the very power of the stars. I watched in wonder as tech priests conducted the ritual patterns that kept these artificial suns burning, their binary cant as much a part of the process as the mechanical controls.
The plasma containment requires perfect harmony between machine spirit and operator,
Cain explained as we observed a particularly intricate sequence.
Each reactor has its own machine spirit, its own unique patterns that must be learned.
I found myself spending hours studying these patterns, seeing how they resembled the way we read Nocturne's volcanic moods, yet followed their own complex logic. The Mechanicum's knowledge of plasma technology far exceeded anything the books on Terra had revealed. In the metallurgical chambers, Magos Dexalus introduced me to their most basic forge craft. Even this basic knowledge involved alloys I had never encountered. Adamantium steel composites, ceramite formulations that could withstand the most severe punishment.
Today we shall begin with ferric blessed alloys,
Dexalus announced.
The Omnissiah grants us understanding of the sacred unions between elements.
The Mechanicum had developed ways to layer metals at a molecular level, creating materials that were far more than the sum of their parts. Each process required precise rituals, specific incense compounds, and careful observation of procedure.
The blessed metals respond to proper devotion,
Dexalus explained as we worked.
See how the structure aligns when the correct prayers are intoned.
And to my amazement, it did. The molecular patterns in the cogitator display shifted and reformed as the tech priests performed their work. By the end of the week, my quarters were filled with data slates containing just the foundational knowledge I needed to absorb. basic principles of archaeometallurgy, preliminary machine spirit propitiation, elementary blessed alloy formulations.
You show promising understanding,
Kane told me as we reviewed my progress.
Tomorrow we begin work with the thermal spirit matrices. The Fabricator General is particularly interested in your insights regarding heat-blessed metals.
I nodded, my mind already racing with questions about the new techniques I'd seen. Even the tools here were marvels. Auspex scanners that could read a metal's molecular scripture, blessed auto-quenchers that could cool metal in microseconds, forge hammers guided by machine spirits. That night, exhausted but exhilarated, I made notes comparing Nocturne's craft with Mars technology. Where we relied on intuition and experience, they had developed precise rituals that achieved similar results. Both approaches had their wisdom, and I could already see possibilities for combining them. 2 weeks into my instruction, and I still found myself struggling to grasp the sheer complexity of Mechanicum Forgecraft. Though my mind could absorb information at incredible rates, every answer led to many new questions. Today I stood before a blessed forge altar, attempting to replicate a seemingly simple ceramite bonding process. The material before me was destined to become part of a Legion power armor plate, though it was currently little more than a dull gray slab. Magos Dexalus watched with characteristic patience as I consulted the data slate containing the proper ritual sequences.
The incense mixture must be absolute,
he reminded me.
3 measures of sacred unguents to 1 measure of blessed machine oil.
I carefully measured each component. The sweet, cloying scent of the unguents filled my station as I began the preparatory rites. A thunderous boom from somewhere far below interrupted my concentration. The ceramite plate's surface, which had just begun to take on the desired crystalline structure, immediately reverted to its previous state.
The lower forges,
Kane explained, noting my distraction.
The day shift is ending in the munition sectors.
I had noticed these regular disruptions over the past weeks, but had been too absorbed in my studies to pay them much mind. Now I found myself wondering about the unseen workers who caused these daily tremors.
Continue,
Dexalus prompted.
The blessed metals require unwavering focus.
I returned to my work, beginning the process anew. This time, I succeeded in achieving the proper molecular alignment. Under the magnification of the Auspex, I could see the ceramite structure shifting into the precise patterns the Mechanicum had perfected over millennia.
Acceptable,
Dexalus announced, which I had learned was high praise indeed.
Though your movements still lack proper reverence, the machine spirits respond better to established rhythms.
Later that day, Kane led me to a different section of the Forge Temple. Here, massive sorting machines processed raw materials brought up from Mars mines. The noise was tremendous, even through the thick observation windows.
The Omnissiah teaches us that all materials have their proper place and purpose,
Kane said as we watched the machines work.
From the highest blessed metal to the humblest ore, all serve in their appointed role.
Through the armored glass, I caught glimpses of workers moving among the machines. They wore environment-sealed suits marked with the distinct patterns of their assigned tasks. Even from here, I could see the electus glowing beneath their skin, the distinctive subcutaneous circuitry that marked all Martian citizens.
The workers seem well organized,
I observed.
The Mechanicum maintains order in all things. Each level of society has its duties, its protocols, its proper place in the hierarchy. It is how Mars has endured, while other worlds fell into barbarism.
A group of workers passed below us, carrying tools that looked very crude compared to the sophisticated equipment in my training forge.
Now,
Kane said, drawing my attention back.
Shall we proceed to the examination of thermal blessing patterns?
Months into my studies, I achieved my first significant breakthrough with blessed ceramite formulation. The plate I'd forged bore the distinctive crystalline patterns the Mechanicum demanded, but I'd managed to incorporate principles from Nocturne's Drake iron working. The result was a composite that showed promising signs of superior heat resistance.
Most irregular.
Magos Dexelus declared, his mechadendrites waving in what I'd learned to recognize as agitation.
Yet the Auspex readings are intriguing.
Kane studied the readings over Dexelus's shoulder, his augmetic eyes whirring rapidly.
The molecular structure maintains stability even under extreme thermal stress. How did you achieve this?
On Nocturne, we learned that metal remembers its shaping. I applied that principle to the blessed ceramite, using the thermal pattern prayers but adjusting their rhythm to match the material's natural resonance.
The two tech priests exchanged looks filled with meanings I couldn't quite decipher. Their subsequent discussion in binary Kant was too rapid and complex for me to follow, though I caught references to deviation from standard patterns and unexplored variables. A distant rumble interrupted their debate, another shift change in the lower forges. By now, I had learned to read these regular disruptions like a clock. The morning shift would be ending in the munitions sectors, while the mid-shift workers would be flooding into the massive sorting facilities beneath us. I often found myself drawn towards the observation windows, standing there, lost in thought. My eyes would register the crowd of workers far below. Each worker's electus glowed with coded meanings: rank, assignment, clearance level, creating rivers of light that flowed through Mars's industrial arteries.
Your attention wanders, Lord Vulkan.
I am simply studying patterns,
I replied truthfully.
the flow of workers, the rhythm of the forges, the cycles of Mars itself. I get a sense they are all connected.
Kane's expression shifted subtly.
You begin to perceive correctly. Every worker is part of a pattern, and every pattern a cog in the Omnissiah's greater design.
We returned to our examination of the ceramite plate. The rest of the day was spent documenting the exact process I'd used, translating intuitive knowledge into precise Mechanicum protocols. It was painstaking work, but I was learning to bridge the gap between Nocturne's craft and Mars' technical orthodoxy. Later, as I made my way back to my quarters, I took a different route than usual. The upper forge temples were relatively quiet at this hour, but I could feel the constant vibration of activity from below. Entire sectors of Mars's industry operated in cycles that never ceased, their rhythms as constant as heartbeats. A group of workers passed me in the corridor, their faces bearing the dark smudges of rad exposure despite their protective gear. They bore the marks of the isotope sorting facilities, I realized, recognizing the distinctive patterns of their electus. They barely glanced up at me, too exhausted to register anything but their own fatigue. Their passage left a lingering scent of rad-suppressant chemicals in the air. It was a smell I'd noticed more and more lately, along with the countless other odors that made up Mars' industrial atmosphere: machine oil, incense, molten metal, recycled air, and the underlying tang of rust that permeated everything. Back in my quarters, I reviewed the day's work. The ceramite breakthrough was significant, but something else nagged at my thoughts. The patterns I was learning went beyond mere technical processes. They spoke of an entire civilization's structure, its strengths, and perhaps its blind spots. More than half a standard year had passed since I had set foot on Mars. Nowadays, I found myself working on increasingly complex rituals with the Forge blessed materials. Today's task involved an attempt to recreate a particular alloy used in Legion vehicles' armor plating. The process required an understanding of molecular harmonics that still mostly eluded me.
The thermal suffusion must align with the third canticle,
Kane reminded me as I prepared the materials.
You must get this part right. The machine spirits are very particular regarding this specific portion of their protocol.
I focused on the molten metal before me. The heat was intense enough that the air shimmered, though it felt merely warm on my skin. The scent of sacred incense mingled with the sharp tang of heated adamantium steel composite. A sudden commotion from the observation gallery interrupted my concentration. A group of high-ranking magi had arrived to witness my work, their crimson robes marked with complex circuitry patterns that spoke of their elevated status. My previous successful experiments had apparently drawn attention. As I began the thermal suffusion ritual, I noticed something odd in the metal's behavior. The molecular structure wasn't forming quite as expected. Drawing on my experience with Nocturne's forgecraft, I made a subtle adjustment to the timing of the third canticle.
Deviation from standard procedure?
One of the observing magi noted, his voice heavy with disapproval. But the results spoke for themselves. The alloy's final structure showed a 15% improvement in structural integrity compared to the standard template. The observers broke into rapid exchanges of binary cant, their mechadendrites twitching with excitement or agitation. It was often hard to tell the difference.
Fascinating,
Kane said, studying the readings.
You appear to have an intuitive grasp of material harmonics that our standard protocols don't account for.
Before I could respond, a deep tremor ran through the forged temple. This wasn't the usual shift-change vibration I'd grown accustomed to. Even the Magi paused in their discussions, their augmetic sensors whirring as they assessed the disturbance.
Reactor anomaly in the lower forges,
Kane announced after consulting a data feed.
The maintenance crews will handle it.
Perhaps we should...
I began, but was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger adept. Magos Kane, the messenger's Vox unit crackled. Your presence is required in Forge Complex 7. The reactor's machine spirit grows restive.
This is most irregular. Lord Vulkan, if you'll excuse me.
I could assist,
I offered, already setting aside my tools.
I have some experience with thermal containment.
A rapid exchange followed between Kane and the other Magi. I caught fragments about protocols and clearance levels, but also terms that suggested genuine concern about the reactor situation.
Very well,
Kane decided finally.
Your expertise may prove valuable, but you must follow our leads precisely. The machine spirits of Mars are not some wild volcano.
As we hurried through the Forge Temple's corridors, I noticed increasing signs of disruption to the usual ordered patterns. Workers were being evacuated from several levels, their electus pulsing with warning signals. The tremors grew stronger as we descended into Forge Complex 7. Even through multiple levels of armored bulkheads, I could feel the reactor's fury. Kane's augmetic eyes adjusted constantly, their brass irises spinning as they processed multiple streams of data.
The third Anima Excavator team is being prepared. The first two teams have already been expended.
Expended?
The first team was lost during metamorphosis. The machine spirit proved too potent. Their electus overloaded instantly.
He paused.
The second never completed binary purification. Their souls were shattered during the initial contact. Their bodies still walk, but their minds are gone.
We passed through massive blast doors marked with radiation warnings and prayers of containment. The reactor chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows and steam. At its heart, the plasma containment field flickered erratically. Its normal blue glow shot through with angry red pulses. The Anima excavators immediately caught my eye. 5 figures in environment-sealed suits that were unlike anything I'd seen in the maintenance sectors. Where standard rad gear was purely functional, these suits were covered in intricate holy symbols and blessed inscription circuits. Multiple layers of ceramite and lead mesh plating spoke of the extreme conditions their wearers would face.
The Omnissiah's chosen vessels,
Kane said, noting my interest.
Their electus are designed specifically for the 3 phases of anima excoriation. Each member takes a portion of the machine spirit's essence during spirit extraction, preventing any single human vessel from being overwhelmed.
And the ones who failed?
Kane inclined his head toward the far corner of the chamber, and I followed his gaze. 2 bodies lay slumped together, though one was in especially dire condition. Its protective suit had half fused to the charred flesh beneath, sections of synthetic fiber and scorched metal melding grotesquely with blistered skin. A sickly orange shimmer, part metallic sheen, part burned viscera, caught the dim light. Where the suit had peeled away, the corpse's flesh had blackened and flaked into delicate ashen layers, an almost fragile texture to a thing so utterly ruined. Though smothered beneath oily soot, I could still make out the faint lines of its electus. It glimmered like a dying ember trapped beneath a crust of ash and melted alloy, as if some arcane current still pulsed through it. A stubborn glow, clinging to the edge of oblivion, refused to extinguish. However it had been engineered, it was no crude device to trifle with. "The machine spirit has grown more hostile with each failed attempt," the senior tech priest reported. The second team fared even worse than the first. Their suits remained intact, yes, but the beings inside had changed. They stood rigid like vacant statues, their limbs locked in unnatural angles, occasional sparks of machine life visible through their cracked visors. As I watched this unsettling tableau, the third excavator team advanced. Over the crackle of dying machinery, their leader's voice hissed through the layered vox channels. "Commencing binary purification. Omnissiah, guide our circuits." They arranged themselves in a pentagram around the reactor's containment field. Suit-mounted sensors chuffed out carefully metered clouds of incense and unguent, their shimmering particulates sketching intricate symbols in the heated air, coded prayers and wards that rippled and curled in geometric dance.
Temperature is far exceeding safe parameters. The machine spirit's resistance is stronger than calculated.
One of the excavators screamed, a sound distorted by their suit's vox system into something barely human. Their suit's radiation sensors were flashing critical warnings, but they maintained their position. "Mechamorphosis phase beginning," the team leader announced, voice strained. "The spirit, it fights the transition!" I could see it happening. Where their predecessors had failed completely, this team was actually making progress. The reactor's angry red pulses began to shift, responding to their efforts. But the cost. The first breach in the leader's suit was barely a hair's width, but it vented superheated air with a spiteful hiss. Through the gap, intricately layered electu circuits flared like sunspots, struggling to channel the machine spirit's essence through boiling flesh. "Maintaining The second excavator's voice fractured into raw static. Their faceplates sloughed into molten slag, unveiling blackened skin and shrunken muscle beneath the radiance. And yet they did not falter. Even as the suit's integrity failed, their electus pulsed like fevered arteries, insistently threading energy through charred ligaments and brittle bone.
"The pattern is wrong,"
I whispered to myself. I watched the currents of force twist and coil, a living geometry made malignant.
"They're trying to divide something that craves unity."
Before I could shout a warning, the leader's suit burst apart with a hideous rending of metal and polymer, revealing the full horror of what lay beneath. Inside, the electors weren't just glowing. They burned with an almost holy fury, relentless lines of fire that etched themselves upon living tissue. As the leader strained to hold the ritual together, his flesh shifted, turning glass-like. His whole body lit up, power coursing through now translucent organs like hellfire, blood and bone repurposed into alien filaments, carrying the machine spirit's wrath through every trembling nerve.
Spirit extraction failing.
Kane's voice now carried genuine alarm.
The pattern is collapsing.
The leader's last words rang through the inferno, impossibly clear and resonant, his glassy frame refracting the harsh light from his inner fire. "For the Omnisire, we offer!" And then he burst. There was no grand explosion, just the brittle crunch of a body no longer flesh, but some grotesque crystal, splintering into shards that tinkled as they struck the deck. In that instant, the chamber descended into pandemonium. The pattern the excavator team had so painstakingly formed collapsed like a blasted cathedral of circuit and bone. Alarms wailed in strangled howls as radiation levels lunged beyond the red line, suffusing the air with lethal brilliance. I watched, transfixed, as the surviving excavators failed in rapid succession, their suits and bodies liquefying into molten ruin. "Prepare the rites of ultimate sanctification!" the senior tech priest bellowed, his vocoder scraping for clarity through the electronic storm. "May the Omnisire forgive us, but we must—"
Wait!
I cut him short, my voice booming. Something had changed. Amid the shrieks of klaxons and the roar of ionizing currents, I realized the reactor's pulse no longer matched its old rhythms. Kane's eyes locked onto me, and for the first time I saw something there. Something else besides the usual stone-faced expression. Was that fear?
Lord Vulkan, the ultimate sanctification has begun. The protocols cannot be.
I ignored him. I was already moving, pushing through smoke and debris until I reached a fallen excavator sprawled against a control console. The distance between me and the containment field seemed impossibly small, yet each step would demand its price. At 10 paces, the first wave of heat struck me like a molten hammer blow. My outer garments began to shrivel and crisp, turning from cloth to blackened parchment in heartbeats. At 7 paces, the fabric ignited outright. I cast it off in smoldering tatters, each shred disintegrating into ash before touching the deck. The inner layers, fused into a molten membrane by the inferno, clung stubbornly for a few more steps before peeling away in stiff, charred strips, as though flayed from my flesh by invisible blades. At 5 paces, the air around me flickered like the vision of a delirious mind, shimmering with lethal radiance. For a moment, I allowed myself the foolish hope that my body, hardened by years in Nocturne's volcanic crucibles, might endure. My melanin surged, my blood thickened, my organs ramped up their miraculous capacity for adaptation, yet still the world burned hotter. 4 paces. Here began true torment. My skin, long used to slag furnace temperatures and coronal flare radiation, cracked like old forge scale. I watched, oddly detached, as the first scab of darkened flesh fell away, exposing blood-slick tissue that sizzled on contact with the superheated air. My regenerative abilities struggled to keep pace, pushing forth new cells that blistered and died before they could fully form. 3 paces, I could feel my flesh cooking layer by layer. Every depth of dermis, every nerve filament registered the temperature spike and screamed. My body had become a grim laboratory, measuring out its own destruction in excruciating detail. My enhanced nervous system, so valuable in times of fine craftsmanship or delicate alloy testing, now betrayed me, magnifying each dying cell's agony into a chorus of shrieks. At one pace from the containment field, desperation seized my system. Capillaries constricted, sweat glands poured forth until they vaporized, muscle fibers clenched into rigid knots, all in a final doomed effort to shield something, anything, beneath the ravaging heat. My vision swam with the outlines of the control altar. Its metallic surface glowed like white-hot coals, waiting. I reached out, ignoring every instinct that screamed against it. The instant my palms touched the altar, new thresholds of pain were revealed. The metal fused to my flesh, searing its imprint into muscle and sinew, burning away fat and tendon until my fingers met my own bones. Even then, I held on, forcing my charred nerves to obey. My body's miraculous healing trait lashed out in vain, birthing cells into a hell they could not survive. In that suspended moment of obliteration, I felt the machine spirit's presence press against my mind. Immense, implacable, and utterly alien. Its power eclipsed the Mechanicum's rituals by magnitudes. It was the heart of a star, the soul of a dying universe, vast and pitiless. And as my flesh and bone endured an agony beyond imagining, I finally understood just how profoundly we had misjudged the entity we sought to tame.